F
F
F
M
M
New Haven
New Haven
Streaming
Streaming
Live
Live
at
at
www.
www.
dot
Good afternoon and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Now, here's a guy we got in the studio today who makes New Haven tick behind the headlines, behind the scenes, but makes a difference in the families of hundreds of kids every year. Say good morning to John Taylor, Executive Director of the Booker T. Washington Academy. Good morning, sir. Good afternoon. Nice to have you.
Good afternoon, Paul. Glad to be here.
I'm going to ask you to get real close to the mic, if you don't mind, while you're talking, just so we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
So, the school year's about to begin. What are you guys, August 30?
August 30th, correct.
August 30th, about to begin. Everyone's getting ready. It's a little different from last year. We're still in middle of a pandemic. I would call it more of an endemic at this point, but we can quibble about that on other occasions. And you got to figure out how to open school again. You went through this last year, but I'm getting a feeling that this year is a little different from last year. Am I right?
Correct. A little different. Hopefully, that's a good thing. We have a significant percentage of our staff vaccinated. A lot of our families are vaccinated in terms of the grown folk and students above the age of 12. And so hopefully this year will feel a little different. We're not starting the year with any distant learners or any sort of hybrid instruction. So we're 100% full-time in school every day.
Now, you guys were at the leading edge. You're a charter school for K through 5, correct?
Well, we're now K through 8. This is our first year with 8, correct.
And you guys pivoted pretty quick last year. You started out, if I'm not mistaken, fully remote for only a little while, and then you came back in person for hybrid. Is that correct?
Correct. Even in March, we only shut down for a week or two before we went to the full hybrid. So
wow,
we were up and running
during
first of
COVID. So
April.
New Haven for the end of that last school year, and then well into the next one, for close to a year, we were all remote.
Yeah, now I'm thinking back. Wait a minute.
That's right. We got you on the record here. You are on radio.
You know what? We did go. We closed out the year full remote.
Oh yeah, how come?
I'm saying 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I'm going back now. And then last year.
That was 100 years ago, March 2020, when our world changed.
Yeah, we went full remote last year after 100% remote. At least that is as an option after Easter break.
You're talking about 2020.
2020. We came back in January, and we offered it. But the majority of our families, the majority of folk who were distant, who had decided to be 100% distant, remained so. And
in
April
I'm a little
when
confused.
a lot of those students started to come back.
March 2020 is when the pandemic hit.
Correct. March 2020. Okay.
So yeah.
It seems like 3 or 4 years now in the way this
we've
thing
had
is
several
rolled
lifetimes
out.
this pandemic.
Yeah.
So how long was Booker T fully remote at the beginning?
You're taking me back. Mercy.
I know.
When it first started, we went remote and we remained remote for all the way through to the summer. So in 2020, the exception was there were some families that could not do the remote at all. So we did open up pods where we had academic assistants who opened the school and allowed students to come in small numbers. And they spread
were
out
you going in for that?
Correct, yeah.
So your life was on the line from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean,
That's why
wasn't
you're doing it,
concerned.
right?
We were following mitigation strategies. We were doing what we were supposed to do.
For that first spring in 2020, when we didn't know how this thing works, how it travels, how to protect against it, we thought it was about washing our hands, not about covering our mouths.
Yeah.
You were remote except for kids who came in for pods. So
Right.
then,
very, very small select population of students.
so you're all remote. Then came the fall of 2020, September 2020, the beginning of last school year. How did you
Right.
begin that year?
So there was a hybrid plan.
So, you did hybrid start in September.
Correct. So we offered full-time distant, which about a third of our parents took advantage of.
Oh, okay.
And then we went hybrid for everyone else. Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule. Friday, everybody off, deep cleaning of the building.
And then, cleaning's important. Washing our hands is important. I get the sense, not an expert, this had nothing to do with how COVID went. Nobody got COVID from a surface being not clean.
That's what we're hearing. I mean, we're hearing it was...
But we didn't know that then.
Yeah, at the time we didn't. And we were wiping everything down, and we'll still continue to do that.
Yeah, I think there's some permanent changes from COVID,
Yeah.
including like looking at trees and nature in the sky more than we used to, right?
Yeah, the world is different.
So you opened last September with a hybrid. Did you
Correct.
ever go back to full remote after that?
Occasionally. There were maybe one or two occasions, and at no time were both schools closed at the same time.
What do you mean both?
We have a school in New Haven, a site, our largest site, K to 4,
And that's the St. Stan's building on State
Correct.
Street. And then where's 5 through 8?
in Hamden.
That Leader Hill?
No, Circular Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Right. So neither site, I think each site may have closed down once and went remote for a week or two.
And was that because of an outbreak?
That was because of an outbreak, correct.
You know, that's such a big job you have as a principal of a school. You're called executive director. Is it fair to say it's like principal?
Well, we have principals. So the executive
Oh.
director, I used to be both. When we first opened, I carry both titles, but since then, we now have a principal in each school.
Oh, who reports to you. So
Correct.
you're like the principal.
Correct.
And then, so there was a lot on your shoulders, John Taylor. I mean, you didn't want to die, but you wanted people to, or get really sick, but you wanted your teachers to teach and your kids to learn. What was going through your mind at that when you didn't have enough information to know for sure that you were going to make the right decision?
I mean, we followed the guidance from the CDC. You did everything possible in terms of the mitigation strategies. We did maintain the social distancing. We did kept students in cohorts, so we can do the contact tracing, and we just were really diligent on that.
I remember
end.
how open you were. I found getting information out of Booker T was the easiest of all kinds of schools anywhere when someone would get COVID. Yeah, someone got COVID. We're going to let you know that, and this is how we're dealing with it.
Yeah,
was
we-
that part
we
of what you were
actually-
thinking? Was
Yeah.
transparency important?
Huge, especially for our families.
And is that because they won't trust you otherwise when you need something from them?
Well, I mean, it's just the right thing to do. I mean, everybody was affected by what was going on in the school.
So even
it
if one
became-
thing, like in New Haven, it's like if one classroom gets it or one school, but they don't want anyone else to know. And I understand they don't want people to freak out because it's like other people get the flu,
Yeah.
But you let everyone know.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to, right? Especially, so think about it internally. You got teachers who are concerned. I mean, they have families too. They have to go home and take care of loved ones. And so we were very intentional about being clear about, if there was an outbreak, where it happened, that the contact tracing had been done, being very intentional about alerting folk, whether or not they had to be concerned, and just follow the protocols. And it worked out.
And then, so how many kids ended up getting sick and teachers?
I don't have the number off the top of my head. I would say a couple dozen students and probably less than a dozen teachers over the course of a year.
Did anyone get very sick?
One scholar was in the hospital for a period of time.
Ooh, how old?
Middle school. I want to say maybe 5th or 6th grade.
Was it a child who had other health problems?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what
Yes.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
How did that kid end up doing?
Just fine.
Oh, yeah.
Just fine. Yeah, she recovered fine. But, and we found out this actually was early in the pandemic. And we found out sort of accidentally because at that point we were full remote and it wasn't communicated to us by the Department of Health. We found out from, a relative, somebody who knew the child.
So the kid
Chased
wasn't
it
in the
down.
school building.
No, it was remote. So there
this
was
had
no
nothing to
need to do
So
any
no one got really
quarantining.
sick at Booker T the whole
Right.
time. Well, that's good.
Right.
And how did learning happen? Did you do remote well? Did you find something? What was working? What wasn't working? What did you learn?
Surprisingly, we learned the importance of continuity over everything else and consistency, because the students that probably fared best in terms of having the least amount of learning loss were the students who were 100% distant learning for the full year, because they had the same teacher every day, all day, 5 days a week. And that seemed to matter. And we're seeing the same thing with the results of the state testing. That population was the one that had the least amount.
The ones who had the most
learning.
consistency.
Correct.
So does that mean the ones who went hybrid, the whole hybrid time, the ones who went remote, the remote time, didn't go back and forth?
The ones that went full distance. So they were remote for the full ride.
Oh, and they did the best on tests.
Yes.
That's so interesting, because
Yeah.
other kids have really fallen behind because of remote.
Yeah, so the big challenge was, and once again, I go on my way to say continuity and consistency. These are the students whose parents were in a position to be able to support the learning at home.
In other words, they didn't have like a single parent working crazy hours at CVS.
Right. Or they were, these are the parents that were able to actually stay home with the scholar, or they had some other arrangement, some additional supports. So
they also
where it worked well.
Did they also need to make sure they had other activities for the kids? So you got to make sure the kids get out, right? Like going to the park or playing with a friend at the jungle gym or something.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we encouraged. But also our, for lack of a better word, specials teachers did push in and provide those sort of activities even remotely for students.
So give me an example.
So the phys ed teacher would push into the remote learning space and create games that students can do right in their home. So they would play like sock basketball. They'd have them set up,
Really?
basket, and
Oh, that's kind of fun.
And they, keep track of
What
points.
kind of
and
basket
stuff.
do you set up at home for sock basketball?
So it would be either a can or maybe a small trash container. And but they had all these games aligned for students. And
So would they play all
shared
at once? Like would there be 10 kids in a Booker T class playing sock basketball at once? With
They'd
the
be
phys ed teacher?
competing against each other.
How do you
Yes,
compete?
Actually, so the students would have to set the cameras up. I saw it play out some of the activities. They would set the camera up where they could see, and then the teacher would keep score or keep a tally mark of whether or not students had made it, and then would sort of put in the chat where students were.
And would
in terms of the
students watch
scoring.
each other
They
shoot?
were competing against each other.
I don't know why this flashed on me when I was a kid. Remember Earl the Pearl Monroe at the New York Knicks?
Yep.
So he's talking about when he was a kid, he had a milk bottle.
Yep.
And a ping pong ball.
I had something
That's-
similar in my basement.
What'd
so,
you have?
Yeah, I had it was like a kidney bean can that you cut the top and bottom out of, and use a sock, and you take the sock, put masking tape on it so it wasn't hairy, and that's how I learned how to shoot my jump shot. That's how my jump shot got to be so pure.
My brother and I used to play. We used to have like a punching bag, but the frame was there, and we played
Yeah.
with a Nerf ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The things
So you
kids
guys-
are creative, man. They can make fun out of pretty much anything.
So you said something I never heard before, which is that the kids who stayed home and did remote learning did the best on standardized tests.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah.
But I guess you're saying it's not applicable, and this has something to do with a large discussion about Booker T. Is you need to have the parents in a position who can make that happen, right? And not
That's-
everybody is.
That's huge, right? That was this sort of the variable that made the difference for those families who were able to work from home, and that was a huge variable as well. They tended to be able to support the learning.
Or you said or made other arrangements. Does that mean
Or
like
made
a
other
grandparent
arrangements.
or something?
Could be a grandparent, but then the grandparent had to be tech savvy. But one of the things that we did very intentionally was we created the capacity to support parents at home with the tech piece. So we took some members of our staff, trained them up, and they became the tech support team that you can call and ask for support remotely, or on occasion, the rare occasion where they felt safe, it was a safe condition, they would actually go to the home to support the parent.
And again, that was
With the
1/3 of the
technology.
students were remote only.
This was for those families who were relying 100% on
And that
remote.
was 1/3 of your school, you said.
Yeah, it was about 33% initially. By the end of the school year, it was 27%.
Well, you really got your numbers up your head
Yeah,
there.
we tracked that.
I didn't thought there weren't standardized tests last year. I thought
there
there was
were.
a way.
Oh, there was an SBAC. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's how they
And
did.
in fact, they just released the overall data, I think today, about that very idea of how did the remote students do. We got the
And what
the
did they find out?
information That the remote students actually did better. So it wasn't
Not
unique
just
to
Booker
Booker
T.
T. The remote students did better on the assessments at the end of the day.
And so even in New Haven Public Schools.
They didn't go by school. They were across the state. There seemed to be a trend that the remote students outperformed their peers who took the test in school versus the students who took the test remotely.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, you don't know, and you hope this isn't true, but it's possible that they had additional help at home too with the assessment. They got parents in the house. You never know. You never know. So when we did our beginning of year testing, we noticed that our incoming kindergarten last year was our highest performing amongst the remote population. And we're like, wow, we got some rock stars. But we had to sit back and say, wait a minute. They have family at home. It might be helping them with some of the questions. So you never know.
As a parent, I wouldn't know where to draw that line, to tell you the truth, with the kindergartner. I just wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's nefarious.
Yeah. I don't think it was anybody's effort to cheat necessarily. But we weren't the only. I talked to other school leaders, especially charter school leaders, and said they saw something similar.
So John Taylor is the exec director and founder of Booker T. Washington Academy, K through 8, you said?
Yeah. Founding principal.
The
founder was Pastor Elder Morrison, right?
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
K-8 school, 480 students or more now?
We're at 540 students this year.
540. So you've been growing, doing great over 7 years.
Yeah.
Started out on, was it Worcester Square?
Worcester Square.
Then you moved to State Street with the old State Stands building. When my kids were at Edgewood School a million years ago, we were temporarily there when they were rebuilding the school. And so what's going to be happening this year on August 30th? What's going to be the rules vis-a-vis COVID? You said everyone's going to be in person.
Correct.
What else? Is there going to be masks?
There will be masks. So the mask mandate will be in effect. We're going to once again follow the CDC guidelines, Department of Public Health. So students and staff will wear masks. The majority of our students are under the age of 12. So our 7th and 8th graders, some of whom are vaccinated. I don't know the exact number at this point. Hope to find that out soon. But we're going to continue to wear masks and continue to socially distance as much as possible. We'll probably stick to the cohorts as well.
What does that mean? Smaller classes?
Or keeping the students together. So they move as a group so that if somebody turns up sick, you can easily do the contact tracing.
Mm-hmm. What's going to be different besides the fact that it's not going to be hybrid?
That's the big difference.
And it wasn't hybrid at the end of the year, was it?
No. We were, we still were. We were 100% in terms of access. Students had the opportunity to be in school every day, 4 days a week. But some students, like I said, 27%. This will be 5. It'll be 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be no more hybrid, no more distance learning this year. It's not even an option.
Okay. And do you think that's because we're in a different phase now where you can get vaccinated? We know a lot of things that aren't necessary to do and what to focus on, that the mask can help, vaccine are a big help.
I don't know. Paul, it's tricky.
Right, because we don't know what
this
the
new
next variant
variant is. It's throwing anybody for a loop. So, I mean, we're going into this thing optimistic, but fingers crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure exactly how it will turn out. We are preparing ourselves in the event that we have to go to any level of remote instruction in response to, what happens with COVID. So we'll see.
And you're also prepared to have just the cohorts. How many people are in a cohort?
I mean, cohorts are essentially grade levels broken down into smaller groups of no more than 20.
No more than 20. Yeah. Okay. Did you get sick over the year?
I got sick, and I took 5 COVID tests, and they all came back negative. So a lot of it was psychological.
Well, we all were, right? There's that 11 o'clock or 1 in the morning when you're sniffling, and you say, I'm sniffling, do I have COVID? And then the whole cascade. Then I can't do this. I got this person sick. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And the funny part is, on 2 of those occasions, went to the hospital, got the quick test.
How sick were you?
Well, the main thing for me on both occasions was breathing.
Well, that's the biggie.
Seemed difficult, right?
COVID's about breathing.
Scared me to death. I go to the to get a quick test. It came back negative, and I felt better right away. So it was psychological.
We all had that. We've been through a lot of places. But John Taylor, it sounds like you really got through the woods and Booker T. I'm optimistic about the year.
Yeah, me too.
And we don't know yet if we'll be like the UK where Delta drops fast, because UK did have a higher vaccination rate than we do. You said that most of your teachers are vaccinated, so it sounds like you're not requiring it.
I don't know that we can at this point.
Why?
We're keeping our ears open.
Because New York is requiring it.
Yeah, New York, that has to come from the governor. I think we need to hear from the governor whether or not we can require, because teachers are essentially state workers. So
Really? Because they're on the pension plan?
You're on a pension plan. We use public dollars to pay their salaries. So we have to make sure that that's something that we can do.
Is that because you're a charter school? Is that true for all schools?
I think it's true for all schools.
So in other words, would you like there to be a mandate?
I would love there to be a mandate.
But you need to hear from the governor.
We need just to ensure that that's something we can do.
So most already are? Like, do you know how many are?
Yeah. So last count, it was like 80% of our teachers were vaccinated that we were able to confirm.
And why is it you'd like to do a mandate?
Because it's important. I think it also gives people a sense of safety, for lack of a better word of saying it, to know that their peers are vaccinated. The mask are one thing, but there's times you're eating together, you're in a space together, you're moving. The vaccination
compared to vaccination,
and that was a significant turning point for people's level of comfort of being in the school building.
I know for me it was. I was a hermit.
Yeah.
Except for the park and stuff. And once I got vaccinated, I became almost like Governor DeSantis. Like I was going everywhere.
Yeah. Same here. Same here. So
you're
matters.
waiting on the governor.
Yep.
And what it's just to give you and if he gives you the okay, you'll do it.
Yeah. Yep. We would do that.
Now you're a charter school, and I always think of Booker T. Like we use words like charter school, but the charter schools are different from each other. They all are publicly funded to some extent. They all have the ability to make some of their own rules that traditional public schools can't. They can have longer days. They can have teachers doing more flexible teaching. But when we think of charter schools, in New Haven alone, there's so many different kinds. There's sort of Common Ground, which is sort of hippie environmental school. They're all good. You have the whole chain of Achievement First, which is sort of like the big corporate funded, white run, black student. They've had a lot of successes, a lot of controversy about discipline. You guys were really different. You came out of Varick AME Zion Church on Dixwell Avenue. Eldrin Morrison, who used to be the minister there, very kind of dynamic leader in New Haven. He said, I'm just hearing from my parents in Dixwell. They want to have more choices. They want their kids to go to a better school. And as the church will do that. And he got some of the same funding that other charters got. But this was a black-run school. Is that a difference? Does that matter?
I think it matters to some of our parents, and most certainly matters to students. I always say you can't be what you don't see. So we're asking our students to aspire to greatness, or to aspire to become teachers, and to aspire to become principals, etc. They need to see people that look like them in those roles and in school spaces. But generally, if I had to choose between a black teacher or a black school leader and somebody who was super competent at their job and cared deeply about children, I would prioritize somebody super competent and cared deeply about children over race, right?
But that's sort of one of the fallacies.
If I can have both, I'm good, right?
But that's one of the fallacies of affirmative action. I mean, again, this is my take on it. What kind of drop support for some affirmative action at national school in the level in the country, I believe, is that white-run institutions didn't take it seriously. They would create a position for someone who's minorities here, say, look, we're hiring someone. They'd hire someone who maybe isn't going to succeed in a job just to make it look like they're doing the right thing, as opposed to if you fundamentally believe that one race isn't superior to other, then maybe you got to broaden your network or where you look, but beyond people you happen to know, and do the work to recruit and find the people who are good at something. Like, is it really that either or?
Or build the capacity to train up and support folk, right? If you're truly committed, that's what you'll do.
And so the idea
take
of
that extra step.
Booker T was never that all the teachers had to be black, all the ministers had to be black, but it was a black institution that started it.
Right.
And you did the work.
Right.
You were the ultimate charge. But when I looked at Booker T, I didn't see a majority of anyone race as teachers. Is that accurate?
I think early on, when we first started, we started with predominantly Teach for America teachers.
So is it white.
And majority white. And since then, we're probably now slightly majority black. We're probably 55% black and brown teachers. with a mix of other races and ethnicities.
So your first qualification is someone who's super competent and cares about children.
Yep.
So am I putting words in your mouth then that maybe the fact that you're doing the picking makes true affirmative action work? Because maybe you don't have to look at color as much as someone else because you're going to find different kinds of people looking for the job.
Yeah, I think the scrutiny is probably a little different for an achievement first than it would be for a Booker T, by virtue as a result of who the leader is.
Or how about New Haven Public
as a principal
Schools?
of Keller?
How about HPS? I'm not picking on achievement first. I think we have a society problem. We don't have achievement first or any one group problem. It's that white-run institutions, many institutions are white-run, and they kind of screw up. We screw up affirmative action.
So, I mean, so I'm not from Connecticut. I'm from Pittsburgh originally, but came here from New York, and will say the access to diverse candidates was dramatically lower in the state of Connecticut than it was pretty much anywhere else I've been, and I've been a few places.
Why is that?
I don't know. I know at one point, I remember when the state made
You also been in Delaware. Yeah.
Yep. And then state made an overt commitment to diversity, and only found 6 candidates in schools of education across the state. That's a little scary. There's something about, the recruitment process, early in students' educational careers. When they go off to college, there aren't people of color in large numbers choosing to become educators. So we got to fix that. So, I mean, I think the problem is bigger than, on the back end, looking at, the hiring practices of districts, charter schools that are run by white leaders, that sort of thing. I don't think that's the problem.
But then
that's
why
a
are you doing
symptom
better?
of a problem.
Agreed, but why are you doing better?
Oh, we're very intentional. We go all over the country looking for candidates. I mean, we have a recruitment arm that is dedicated to hitting HBCUs and really getting out there and going into a variety of different spaces looking for talent.
So you've done well there.
Yeah.
And the other thing is
and to be honest, that was pushed by Pastor Morrison.
Oh, I know.
Like,
He had
that was something that was a big deal to him. Yeah.
The other thing is that Varick was the largest, I don't know if it still is, largest black congregation in town. So there were people they were already connected to who would become part of a school community, correct? Like, what's the percentage of the population racially at Booker T?
Oh, you mean in terms of students? The student body is 84% black, 15% Latin, and 1% other. And the other is a few Asian students, a few white students.
You know what's interesting about that is that the New Haven Public Schools, the plurality is now Latino.
Oh, okay.
The fastest growing group in New Haven.
Yeah.
We don't know real numbers because undocumented, not always being counted, but we're getting pretty close to Hispanics, the largest group in New Haven, according to the census, and they're the plurality in the schools will soon be an outright majority.
Okay.
But we're not seeing that at Booker T. You think it's because the connection to Varick? Who finds out about the school? Who gets tapped in?
Our numbers have increased a little bit every year. I think this year we're projecting 18%. So it's been creeping up. But I think people are just learning about Booker T.
Yeah. And the name was an interesting intentional because like in our day, John, right, we go back a while, there was that whole debate. Booker T was a little bit of a charged term in political circles. It was sort of posited against W.E.B. Du Bois versus a sort of separatist versus assimilationist, be one way of looking at it, or, pull it by your own, don't depend on white people for the success versus, Du Bois was a, while a very strong voice against racism, was very much a cross.
Yeah.
But I mean, as with the arguments about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, I think people came to re-examine those dichotomies as faulty, that it wasn't either or. You can have a strong sense of identity, self-worth, and also self-advancement, and function in a large society, which I think you're kind of doing with your model, right?
Yep, we're attempting to.
But how'd they pick Booker T? What do you think the thinking was?
I asked the same question when I came. I was a W.E.B. Du Bois guy. Having made that decision while in college, that I believe
college,
more in his philosophical thinking.
No one picked Booker T in college.
And but Pastor Morrison was always a huge believer in Booker T's approach. This idea that Booker T was leaving institutions that were elevating the race,
especially educational institutions.
Absolutely. Tuskegee, the 1,000 or so Rosenthal schools that he was a part of,
and he did get white support, but they were black run.
Right.
So, what year were you in college?
Ooh, man. My college years were in the 80s.
Yeah,
probably the whole decade.
Okay, I was a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
But it was really a generation before us when you looked at black nationalism like the Black Panthers or SNCC, the second half of SNCC.
Right.
They, even though those are people in college who definitely would have picked W.B. Du Bois over Booker T because they're more confrontational. In fact, I would argue they were somewhat the heirs of Booker T because they were arguing about self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think it gets complicated.
It does, yeah.
But in the meantime, you got a school to run. And the school you run is Booker T. Washington Academy, K through 8. K or pre-K?
Okay.
K through 8. You're on State Street and on Circular Drive, and you're here on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 AM, live stream, newhaven.org. John Taylor's been there since the beginning.
From the very
Booker
beginning.
T. And what have you learned over those years? What worked right and what worked differently from what you expected?
I think we always realized that we had to do something different if we wanted to get different results. So some of the things that we did, some of the levers we pulled was the extended school day was a biggie.
Mm-hmm.
And we leveraged that time to add additional time for reading.
But I'll tell you, I think that has to be one of the least controversial changes because that was all just about how many hours you could afford to put people, right?
Yeah,
who would
played
disagree that you don't send kids home at 2, give them stuff to do, chill out, get that extra reading help or exercise?
Yeah, but it's goes against the norms. It's a big deal in education because it has a direct impact on who would be willing to work in your institution, right? Because a lot of people get into this work for the schedule, right?
So how do you find burnout though? If they're working 8:30 to 5:30, what's the?
No, we don't go 8:30 to 5:30. We go 7:40 to 7:15 to 4:15 for staff.
That's even longer.
7:15 to 4:15.
That's 9 hours.
It's 8 hours. Right, 7:15 to 4:15. Yeah. So okay, on site, but their actual instructional time is 8 to 3:30.
Okay.
So some of that time is set aside for.
And is there an after
collaboration,
program at 4:15?
Yes, but independent of the staff that works on the school day.
Except I would bet, and I'm just taking a guess here, John Taylor.
Oh yeah, of
what's
course.
your hours?
Who even keeps track anymore? I mean,
But
the
aren't you there,
reality
like, first thing at
it's
7:30?
typically first in the building, last to leave has been my.
So how do you avoid burnout of your staff, and how do you burn out of John Taylor?
So I mean, we're intentional about making sure that the amount of instructional time is identical to what they would have in a traditional public school. So they get essentially 2 preps and a lunch, right? So in a public school, a traditional public school, they would get 1 prep and a lunch.
A prep means an hour you're not teaching a period, but you're getting your stuff ready.
Right. So in our school, everybody gets 2. And that's intentional because we rather them have that time to work together and collaborate and plan versus being directly in front of students. And what we find is, so we have also as a general rule that they're on for 2 hours and then they get a break in some fashion, whether that be lunch or one of their preps. So that teachers aren't teaching straight through for 8 hours, which would, of course, be overwhelming. So it seems to work.
So how to avoid burnout?
I mean, that plays a part.
How do you keep,
if you're doing, here's my answer for me why I don't burn out. I'm doing what I enjoy doing. You know what I mean? So the alignment to the work matters. I don't feel like I'm going to work every day. I mean, I love the families we serve, love working with students. And when you find adults who share that interest, right, and who believe what we believe, like for us, it's a philosophical belief. This idea,
purpose-driven life.
So the levers we pull, we try to find staff that are aligned to that way of thinking, that it does matter having that extra time. So anybody who doesn't believe the extended time makes a difference, those are the people who likely would burn out.
It's a hard job hiring. Once you make that commitment to someone, if someone's in the wrong position, you're really stuck. You can't, and it's good that you can't just fire someone, right? You know, unless they do something egregious. But then if someone's not the right person in the slot, it's bad for them and bad for an institution. How did you develop your skill at hiring?
Yeah. A couple different ways. The biggest one is just being intentional. We use something called Ventured for Excellence as a model for, it's an interview process created specifically for teachers. And the beauty of it is it gets at whether or not somebody is aligned for your culture. And so
like Myers-Briggs type thing?
A little different, but similar. It's embedded. Some of the sort of characteristics that you're looking for are the questions are derived in a way to bring out whether or not somebody's a good fit for the organization. So, our process is very intentional, very intensive. So by the time we get to the hiring decision, we got a pretty good sense of whether somebody is authentically aligned.
And how's it turned out? Like, what do you bet?
Probably 80%.
That's good.
Yeah, probably 80%. And in the charter space, that's very good.
Any space.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say any space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about the other 20%? Do you have good support networks set up to help someone succeed better or move on if they don't want to get with the program?
So, our program is designed to be supportive of all teachers, but people tend to self-select whether or not we're fit.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, and usually at the end of a year, they'll make a determination of whether or not we're fit. And those who aren't a fit, you're not mad at them when they self-determine.
Of course,
so
yeah. So 7 years you've been doing this, Chantel. You've been doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
Tell me a day when you said, okay, I got to do this differently because this isn't what I expected. And a day where you said, man, this is why I do it. This is what keeps me going.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to have those days, period. This work is a grind. It's the type of work that if you need to be positively reinforced every day, it's probably not the field for you. It takes a while for students for you to actually reap what you've sown in this work. So, that happens. On occasion, we constantly are looking at our program to see what works. We retool as necessary. The beauty of COVID, we leveraged the lemons and made lemonade and used that time to get better. To go deeper on our program, to be way more intentional. We road mapped all of our systems so that we now are a little better in terms of having codified the things that work.
And do you have a lottery to get into Booker T, or can you?
Yep. So we're a part of New Haven's choice lottery.
Mm-hmm.
So parents apply to New Haven, and we're one of the choices that they have when they.
What kind of demand is there to get in?
We typically have a waiting list at every grade level. Year to year, and we've not had a problem being full enrolled. We've always been fully enrolled since we've opened.
So can you think of a day? I mean, it's a little bit putting you on the spot. I mean, can you think of a day when you said, I don't mean like tell me people's names. I just mean a day when you said, "Ooh, this isn't the way I thought it was going to work." Although you had a lot of experience in education, said, "This is what I got to do different." A day when you said, "Man, this is the sweet spot. That's why we do it."
Yeah. The end of every year, we spend the last week of the school year celebrating our accomplishments for the year. We do it as a full school community. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins come together for what we call moving up ceremonies. And they're absolutely amazing. Even in COVID, we did them as rolling ceremonies where cars lined up and came through and we celebrated. And that's when you're making a difference. When you see the full community celebrating, when you hear from parents how excited they are that their kids are learning and growing at a high rate, and to hear the stories from parents that talk about comparisons of maybe a nephew or a niece and having their kid read to them and saying, this is what this is what my kid learned at Booker T. That's a big deal to me. So in those moments, I know we're making a difference, and I feel good about the work that we've done. But I'm always paying attention to, there's the occasion when you feel like maybe you didn't, reach every kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not possible to do, but you always are aiming for that. Like,
is there an incident you could think of that changed? Like, sometimes they're exaggerated, like myths. But I know when like Nick Pastore's police chief talked about a stabbing he went to when all the kids are crowded on the counts. You have to watch this terrible story, watching the mother get stabbed, and cops said we got it all set. We got all the evidence. We got the case, and he sees the kids, and he said, and that actual moment led to the police department and the Yale Child Study creating a program to deal with kids who witness trauma. Like that's something we learned from an incident. Right? I know life isn't usually neat like that.
Yeah.
But you think of a day in a classroom or something a kid did once, or that you saw a new way you had to handle situations. It's okay if there's nothing that pops up.
There's nothing popping up, so I haven't had anything quite that dramatic for sure.
Yeah, I know, me either. Well, John Taylor is the executive director, the principal of principals at Booker T. Washington Academy, one of our great schools in New Haven. So you grew up in Pittsburgh, you said, right?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And what a lot of people don't know about you is you're a great author. I read the book you wrote about a gentleman who did prison reentry after being involved in some pretty heavy stuff, and a very moving book. And did you ever think you might be a writer, or you just had to write that because the story had to be told?
I just felt that story had to be told. As I got to know Richard Garland, a special person, and felt like so many people could benefit vicariously from his story.
Well, that was ahead of your time. What was that, like 20 years ago?
Yeah, the book was published, I want to say, late 1990s.
Yeah, so you think about now, everyone's talking about prison reentry and how do we do that right, and that's what he was dedicating his life to, sort of like archetypal street outreach worker. But you never thought of becoming a writer in general?
Maybe after I'm retired, I probably will want to do something.
But you came up as a teacher, right? You taught public school, traditional public school,
taught
right?
The Pittsburgh public school system. Even tried my hand at entrepreneurship for about a half a minute. But then the charter school space opened up. Kind of interestingly, I joined the charter school movement as a board member first, and we couldn't find the leader that we wanted to open a school. I had my admin and leadership certificate for the state of Pennsylvania, and they asked me to get the school off the ground. And that's all I was supposed to do. And I left my business to do that, and been back in this work ever since.
Clearly what's in your heart.
Unapologetically charter
What
school.
was it about charter schools that drew you to that movement?
The autonomy. This idea that maybe we know something about educating our own population. And in my experience in Pittsburgh public schools was not everybody was 1,000% committed to the kids. And that bothered me. I was a high school teacher, and never forget sitting in a meeting, a department meeting, and jokes about a good day in school was turning the heat up and turning the lights down and putting in a movie. It broke my heart because I knew on the back end my kids weren't learning. And that hurt me that was even funny.
Is that part of why you went to entrepreneurship? Were you just kind of disgusted with it?
It's part of the reason I did leave education for about 2-3 years.
So but your heart was still in it. So you were on the board of a charter school, and then when they needed the right person to launch the school, you were drawn back in because that's where you wanted to be. You just wanted to be able to do it the way you believed in it.
Correct.
So just need to look at that over historical trajectory, because in the 60s you had the community school movement and the community boards, and those often disintegrated, like whether momentum to keep them going or good experiments, something like Brownsville, where they became racial fights, right? And how to enforce standards versus how to have true autonomy versus whether people know about education, make the decision about education. Then when the charter school movement, charter school movement went in a lot of different directions. In New Haven, there was an earlier generation in Hamden, the Highville Mustard Seed, although that's still around.
It's still around.
But there was the one that started earlier that was supposed to be the African-American-led one on Fitch Street that had the same kind of fight, and it all blew apart.
Okay.
But Varick kind of learned from a lot of that past, didn't they?
Yep.
What did you see in the charter school movement in terms of what works and what doesn't? And what are the pitfalls and what are the opportunities?
Yeah. I would say my initial entrance into the movement, to the space in Pittsburgh, we were, for lack of a better way of saying it, a mom and pop. So we didn't look at best practices necessarily in the way that charter schools do now. So now there's a trend of best practices being published, and every iteration of charter, every new charter created, typically is built upon the foundation of the highest performing charter schools across this country. And that sort of information is shared. In fact, most charter school authorizers require that those best practices be present in the applications, in the charter applications. So I think in terms of what's the word for research-based, charter schools now probably are more research-based than they were initially 25 years ago when the movement was.
And it's interesting how the movement gets portrayed and what's controversial, what's not. I've never heard any controversy involving Booker T or Common Ground. There's a lot of controversies at Achievement First as part of like a bigger network, Eva Moskowitz in New York, where it's kind of it's a flashpoint in our debates as a country, because some people go to the school choice movement where they want to get government to fund private schools. So there's some people put money behind that who kind of said, well, this will be more politically palatable. There are some people put money like tech types who said we like to break, all creative destruction of old institutions and we can kind of fix everything. And other people say that doesn't respect the teacher profession. Then others say the root of charter schools came with the American Federation of Teachers generations ago, when they said teachers should be able to control the process. So they feel like some charters took that away from teachers and others gave teachers the power and the teacher mentality. Do you see any of that playing out on the ground, or is that just noise?
I mean, it depends on where you look. The original charter schools in Minnesota were run by teachers.
Yeah.
These were people who were a little disgruntled about the way things were being done in their schools and got the charter law passed.
And then some backers don't like teachers, especially teachers' unions, which isn't the same thing.
Yeah,
right.
I've never heard of a charter school supporter that doesn't like teachers. Schools, the foundation schools are teachers. They're the ones that actually make a difference in schools. So I don't think that's an issue in the charter space. I don't know. I sometimes feel like the larger, more corporate charters are just bigger targets, and don't necessarily always agree that they're these, I mean, the things that are going on at Success Academy,
New York,
just unbelievable. I mean, the outcomes and where those students end up. How prepared they are to be able to go out and compete in the global marketplace for real and get into the elite institutions. And getting a public school education, having all the markers, high poverty, coming from low resource communities, et cetera, but still excelling academically. There's something to be said for that. And I think what happens sometimes is they come under attack because the only thing that can be attacked are some of their practices, because their outcome. Folk need to figure out how can they get those outcomes, because those schools, to me, and I've spent time in all those schools looking at best practices, and I just think they get an unfair shake a lot of times.
What about, have you been able to chart the trajectory of your graduates? So you haven't been that recently in 8th grade school, 7th grade school. You've been around 7 years. So you have some kids maybe who are just starting to finish their high school careers?
So for us, you mean for me personally?
Booker T.
Oh, so for Booker T, our kids, it's the first graduating class for 8th grade will be this year. So they haven't matriculated to high school yet. So, we'll see where they land. Our goal has always been to ensure that our kids are authentically prepared for the next grade level, period. Like authentically prepared, go anywhere and be tested and promoted as such. And that's always been what we've communicated to our parents, that, the worst thing in the world, Paul, I left high school, went to college, and was like a fish out of water, man. Was woefully underprepared by my high school and didn't appreciate it till I got there, and I'm sitting in classes and looking at students learning, and would say, when did you guys learn this? And they said, high school. I'd never seen this before in my life. It was like a different language. And realize that we weren't all being equitably prepared for what's next. And so, sort of swore when I became a school leader, when I became a teacher, not on my watch, that kids would leave me ready, like authentically ready. And if they weren't, I would tell them. I would be very honest and transparent with parents about where their child was, but also to students. I communicate to students what they need to do. in order to ensure that they're ready to be able to compete. So,
Well, you are doing that at Booker T. Washington Academy. I'm so glad you're in New Haven.
yeah.
I hope you stick around for a while. Will you be? What's next for Booker T and what's next for John Taylor?
Well, we'll continue to grow. We're going to work every year to try to get better, to be the best version of ourselves. And me personally, I plan to be here until I'm no longer wanted, until somebody pushes me out the door.
Okay, that means you're going to be here a long time.
Yep. We've made New Haven and Hampton our home.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in.
Okay.
I wish you luck for a great year at Booker T. Washington Academy, one of our great institutions in New Haven, and John Taylor, the guy at the top who makes it happen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
New Haven. And we're going to take it out. And thanks to Harry Drost, the man behind the controls, who gets us on all the multimedia platforms. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.